Hi, my name is Debbie Pittman. I was commissioned October 17th, 1979, and I have served in North Dakota, which is really funny because I went straight there from South Georgia, my home conference, and I've served in West Virginia, then to New England, and then back to West Virginia, and now I'm in Western North Carolina. Growing up as a child, mostly in the 60s and early 70s, it was a time of great change in our country because it was during the time of the Vietnam War and all the protests, and it was also the time of civil rights. I went to segregated school until 6th grade, and that was the first year that we had persons of color in our classes. And I was in a rural school, so we didn't have any trouble, but the city school had a great deal of trouble trying to desegregate. So that was kind of the backdrop of me growing up, but I grew up in a very conservative family, fairly small United Methodist Church, and I was active in MYF and UMYF, and so that my influences, even though they were kind of conservative, they also taught me the value of all human beings. I felt called to do some type of service ministry from a very young age. I never really thought of anything else except for a brief period in my 6th grade science class when we first learned about computers at Cape Canaveral. And I said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a computer programmer at Cape Canaveral. And then I forgot, went back into feeling more led to work in the church, never knowing the paths would cross. But I attended a ministries workshop or retreat, youth in ministry, that my district put on, and that was where I first heard about the Deaconess. And so I went back to my home church and found our discipline and looked up about the Deaconess, and at that point I did not realize the discipline changed every 4 years, and this was like about a 20-year-old discipline. So at that point you had guaranteed appointments, you could not marry, and a number of other things, but it just really sounded fascinating, the kind of work that deaconesses were doing, and I felt like this is where I belong. At the time I came along, the deaconess movement was kind of in flux. We were not getting very many new deaconesses. In fact, I think there were only a handful of us consecrated when I was commissioned. So my training, I went to Scarrett and had earned a master's degree, and so that covered most of my training with the church. Well, we didn't have to have church polity at that point, but my Christology, Old and New Testament, those kinds of courses. Then when I applied officially to become a deaconess, the person that was in the office at the time decided I really needed another Christology course. So I was already serving in Bismarck, North Dakota at that point, and there was a priory and a Catholic college nearby. So I took a Christology course at a Catholic college. And it was really quite a growing experience because they had Lutherans, Presbyterians, Catholics, some probably not really affiliated with anybody. I think I was the only Methodist in the group, but we became close-knit over the semester. And we even had like a Christmas dinner at the end of the semester to celebrate, because we learned that even though we had differences, we had much more in common. If there's one thing I've learned from my time in ministry as a deaconess, is that we have to be flexible because God's calling can change at any time. So I started out a church and community worker appointed as a community center director in Bismarck, which I enjoyed, loved living up there. I was young enough, I didn't mind the cold air. From there, I was moved to Central West Virginia, Webster County, West Virginia. I was still a church and community worker, but I served a cooperative parish with 28 small United Methodist churches, all within the county. One parish alone, or one charge, had 10 churches. So that was quite an immersion for me, learning to do one-on-one ministry, but also to do leadership training within that very mountainous region. I learned as much as they did, I think, about people everywhere have the same needs. And I was used to the poor folks down, or people who are struggling, not necessarily poor, but struggling folks down in the South Georgia swamps. Well, here we are in the mountains, very different terrain, but it's the same type of struggles with finances, self-esteem, finding meaningful work, and being able to support your family and have the support of your community. From that, I went to Providence, where we worked with Hmong people who were coming in at that time and providing summer programming and outreach for the families during the school year. And from there, then I went to back to southern West Virginia, where I became a computer science teacher. And for my last 20 years, I taught computer science at a historically black college with primarily non-traditional students. Many of them were first-generation students in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. The mining jobs were going away. The railroad jobs were becoming less available. They were injured on the work, or they were trying to break the cycle of poverty. So it was really a unique teaching situation. And now in Western North Carolina, here at Brooks Hale, technology. I've primarily been providing technology support. So we've come full circle from that science class in 6th grade with the computers at Cape Canaveral. I never made it to Cape Canaveral, but God brought me back around to computers and technology. When I was in North Dakota, I was introduced, if you will, to two different groups of folks that we worked with at the community center. Bismarck was on a floodplain, a part of it, and our building was the only permanent building in that floodplain, but there were 1,600 mobile homes. Now, I don't know who decided it was safe to put mobile homes in a floodplain, but anyway, much of our ministry was with the families that lived in those mobile homes, where there were either single parent, high number percentage of single parent families, but even two parent families where they were struggling to make ends meet and provide care for their children. So we offered ministry, and we also tried to advocate with the city to get infrastructure and other things for them. We also worked with a number of Native families, because Bismarck had an organization that worked with United Tribes, that would bring in people who were moving off the reservation, would bring them in and help them to assimilate, if you will, into the Bismarck area, help them find jobs and housing and things like that. So we also worked with our annual conference and the city of Bismarck to try to bring about justice and recognition for these persons who were coming in from the reservation and needed support in order to make the transition. As a deaconess, I think one of the greatest joys is simply the community, the sense of acceptance, affirmation of the calling, the fact that I don't have to try to describe what a calling is, because this community of the deaconesses, home missioners, and home missionaries, they understand what it means to be called by God, to be in ministry, a variety of ministries. So that's probably my biggest joy. But also just the opportunity to meet people, to have my faith and my understanding expanded. And from teaching, I think one of my greatest joys was when the children of my earliest students started coming through. So they were no longer first generation college students, they were now second generation, and the poverty cycle was being broken. So that was also a big joy. Well, if you're going to have joys, you're also going to have challenges and disappointments. I think that one of my disappointments was a young man that I worked with in Bismarck, who seemed to be making progress, but ended up being in the jail and then finally in prison. So that was a disappointment. Just when people don't always take advantage of the opportunities they're given, that's a disappointment. A personal disappointment for me has been that my health became such that I could not continue in active ministry. Challenges, patience. Understanding that not everybody has my life experience, and therefore they do not have my views, my understandings of the world and of people. and impatience with the church, that we say, particularly how workers should be treated, and then we don't always treat our own workers the same way. So that was a disappointment and a kind of a sadness too. And seeing seeing that our nation is swinging back towards a position politically, and just that the individual entitlement and freedom is more important than that of the community. I think we're losing something we fought very hard for, and I'm hoping the pendulum will swing back over, because I think there are not the young, and this is a hope, but I see in the younger generations, they have seen what it could be, and I'm hoping that they will help us to move back to a place of even farther of inclusiveness, acceptance of one another, appreciation for one another, and the recognition that we are all God's children. If I were starting this now, this journey, I think that I would tell myself to be open to God's calling wherever it may be, and for whatever purpose it may be. I didn't always understand why things were happening the way they did, and why I had to move here or move there or leave people that I'd been working with. But being open to God's call, God can work through us in many ways wherever we are. But sometimes our special skills may be needed elsewhere. Also, this is a journey. It's not a destination. It's not something that once you're commissioned and consecrated, that's it. You're in. You're going to move in your understanding of what it means to be a deaconess or a home missioner, what it means to be called, what your current calling is. And I think you'll also come to recognize the dichotomy and yet the similarity. You need to recognize or understand the difference between your calling and your vocation. And I didn't always see that. They're so closely associated as a deaconess or a home missioner or home missionary. But your vocation may change, but your calling is consistent. God will continue to call you every day, every moment, but how that calling is implemented may change very much from what you first envisioned. But that's okay, because you have committed to being the person God needs you to be, where God needs you to be, and doing what God needs you to do. And all of those different types of vocations are valid ministry. And you don't have to defend your calling or your vocation if you are in sync with God and you are comfortable and secure in that calling. And I think that's important, because sometimes we may be out on the edge somewhere and people question what we're doing. But as long as we are sure that we are within God's presence and calling and doing God's purpose, then we should have all the confidence we need to be able to do that. I think another key to success for deaconesses and home missioners and home missionaries goes back to what I said about community. It's easy when you're the only one in your conference or even your entire jurisdiction to feel like, okay, I don't need to relate to the larger community. And I know there was even a short period of time when I kind of pulled away from the community, not intentionally. I just wasn't paying attention because I was paying attention to my work. So that community is your family. You may not always be able to be with them physically, but they are there for you for emotional support, spiritual support, and you need each other. They need you and you need them. So I would just say, be a part of the community, and whatever that means for you, but do be active in the deaconess, home missioner, home missionary community.